Communication apprehension, or the anxiety associated with real or anticipated communication encounters, can be very troubling. It's also a very common thing in our country. In fact, fear of public speaking is considered one of the biggest fears in the United States of America. And in most surveys, it beats death. Now, I personally would much rather give a speech than die. And so would most of my students. But that doesn't mean they aren't feeling the fear. With this in mind, we can look at what causes communication apprehension. And one of the first causes is actually your genes, which might be a little bit of a relief because it means it's not your fault. It's your parents. But there's still an understanding that comes with it. Now, the first off is there are multiple genes. It's not like there's just one gene called the communication apprehension gene. There's a bunch of different genetic codes that are actually meant to do other things, but part of the side effects of them is an increase in communication apprehension. For example, one of it has to do with being an introvert. It appears that being an introvert is often a genetically disposition that people have. People who are introverts are more likely to have high communication apprehension. Now, that doesn't mean every introvert has it. The fact is, almost no one has all of these genes, and almost no one has none of them. All right? The person who has all of them probably is scared to leave their house. And a person who has none of them, they're the creepy person who sits next to you on the bus and tells you way too much information. All right? I myself, for example, am an introvert. Every personality test I've ever taken has told me I'm an introvert. Yet, I actually have low communication apprehension. There's a survey called the PRCA, and when I take it, and the very first time I took it, it showed me it was low. So obviously, I have that genetic tendency, but probably not a lot of the others. The final thing to keep in mind is that you can conquer this no matter what your genes are. Our genes give us a window of where we can land, all right? Now, I was never going to be an NBA player. I am way too stocky, and I am way too short. I am short even compared to short NBA players. It was never going to happen. I could still be really good at basketball and better than most people and do really great at pickup games at the park by practicing. And the same thing's true of communication apprehension. There are techniques to lower it. Is someone with a lot of genetic factors ever going to get down their fear factor from a 30 to a 7? No. But they can easily get it down to what the average American has, which is 19.4. All right. And so realize that with most things in life, your genes give you a range. They don't dictate literally where you fall. Another way that people can have it is their culture. Now, please don't immediately stereotype everyone. This is talking about overall people in a certain culture. They have found that most Asian cultures have higher communication apprehension. This goes along with the fact that Asian cultures often have strategic uses of silence, and even not communicating is still communicating something in them. This method seems to lead to slightly higher levels of communication apprehension. Meanwhile, most Middle Eastern cultures have lower communication apprehension, and many of them are very verbose cultures that have a lot of communication going on. Now, please do not stereotype people based on this. There's a lot of crossover from both cultures, all right? When you take the PRCA, and it actually measures your communication apprehension up to 120 points, we are talking only 10 to 20 point differences on average for these cultures. And realize that there are people in Japan who love to communicate and have no anxiety. And there are going to be people in the country of Jordan who really, really fear giving a public speech. All right. So please don't stereotype on this. This is really information to help yourself understand where your communication apprehension might have. And the final thing is the situation. Any situation can actually elicit fear. Okay. This could be any given situation, and that specific situation gives you a lot of anxiety. And it's usually caused by a bad experience. I actually grew up being very scared of very tight places. We're not talking about being claustrophobic. It literally had to be about the size of me. I was scared of getting physically stuck. And it was only later that my mom told me about an incident when I was about 2, when I rolled under the bed at my uncle's house while I was sleeping there and got stuck and woke up under the bed. That's probably what caused my fear of physically getting stuck. Now, if you take that same idea and apply it to communication, this is actually why communication on only one type of communication. All right. This is why someone who may be very comfortable at communicating in groups, communicating at work, communicating with people individually, suddenly gets in front of an audience and has a lot of fear. And our brain doesn't make sense with regards to this. When bad experiences happen when you're young, you can make strange relationships and connections between them that lead to this fear. All right. And it is very important when we take a look at how do you release your fear and reduce your fear, because when it's a situation, finding that fear helps you be able to conquer it. All right. Fighting genetics and culture is pretty straightforward and by the book. How do I reduce my fear? But when there's been some trauma in your past which is causing this, maybe the first time you did show and tell, people laughed at whatever you brought in kindergarten, for example. You need to realize that's where you're going back and rethink about it. And that's one of the ways to overcome it. And so realizing where your fear comes from is a great way of beginning to conquer that fear.